Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you had a good night's rest, and hopefully you had fun at the reception last night. I'd like to thank Intel and Yocto for providing that reception. It was a pretty neat venue. Hopefully, if you were in the little lobby at the beginning, you noticed that there was a whole other section of the museum to go walk in. I was worried about that. I didn't notice it myself for a while, but then you got in there and there was a lot of interesting stuff and hors d'oeuvres. Just want to remind people about the demo session, the technical showcase that we're having tonight. You might want to get ready for that. We're having a key signing party. I have gotten ready. I'm doing Lazy Man's key signing prep. You're supposed to. It's nice if you have little slips of paper, but if you don't, you can just write your key on the back of your badge and then have people take your picture or whatever. Let's get started with our sessions for today, and we're going to start off with what I think will be a very interesting session, keynote address by Mike Anderson. And Mike Anderson has been coming to Embedded Linux Conference for years and years, and is quite frankly one of my favorite speakers. He's always got really interesting stuff to say. He's the chief scientist for the Pointer Group out of Washington, D.C., and always working on interesting things, and always has real practical hands-on information in his tutorials, and I look forward to hearing his comments on the Internet of Things. Please join me in welcoming Mike.
Thanks, Dan. Okay. Hey, it even worked. Great job. I want to, first of all, thank ELC, Tim, and the organizers for giving me an opportunity to get up in front of you and speak about the Internet of Things. As we move along with the way technology is developing at this point, we have a very broad selection of opportunities for those of us in the embedded Linux community and those of us who are interfacing to devices and understand what a device actually is. This is what we'll be talking about. And this is all of the words in this presentation. I just want to get them all out of the way up front so that now you've had an opportunity to see them. Let's actually get into the material. So when we start with the Internet back in the 60s, it was originally conceived as a mechanism for doing away with the old telex systems that were employed by the military. So in its original form, the ARPANET was designed as a mechanism for being able to send message traffic around between military bases. That, of course, because a lot of the research for the ARPANET was being done by universities, the concept of being able to send out an email and say, hey everybody, I've got a party at my house this Saturday night, why don't you all come over, really carried forward as these university researchers and grad students, etc., then left their respective institutions and got out into industry. Now, we went beyond that to the introduction of Netscape and Mosaic, where we suddenly had Web 1.0. And the concept behind Web 1.0 was simply that of a library. There's lots of information out here. We will go out into the library, we'll look around, we'll ask a few questions, we'll get some information, we'll bring that back and think about it. Web 2.0 introduced the concept of, instead of simply being consumers of information, we became producers of information. Today, for every minute that goes by, there are 8 hours of YouTube video being uploaded to Google. That's a lot. Now, as we become producers, whether it's blogs, whether it's video, whether it's whatever we're producing, putting it out there, we of course are asserting our individuality, our concept, our personness out into the network. And of course there are the downsides where people will then grab a hold of that information and use it against us. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what we're at right now is the cusp of a new transition in the web. Web 3.0. With Web 3.0, we're talking about something called the semantic web. With the semantic web, there's actually way more machines on the internet than there are people. And in the semantic web, these machines start chatting with each other, sharing data. As they share data, we will hopefully be able to derive some wisdom from that. We'll see how that plays out here in the next few charts. So what is the Internet of Things? Well, it can be defined as the point in time at which the number of objects on the internet outnumbered the number of people on the internet. That actually happened about 2008-2009 time frame. And when that happened, we suddenly started to realize that, hey, the approach that we're using right now for the internet with IPv4 is probably not going to scale. So we have to do something about that. We'll get to that in a bit. At the same time, when they start looking at the proliferation of devices on the internet, in 2008-2009, we had about 2 billion devices on the internet. Today, that's calculated to be about 5 billion devices on the internet. By 2015, 15 billion devices. By 2020, 50 billion devices on the internet. That means that each one of us will, on average, by the year 2020, have 6 different internet-connected devices on our person at all times. Now, some of you, certainly those of you from Asia, already have 2 or 3 cell phones with you. Now, that tends to be more common in places like Japan, where they have a cell phone for the family, cell phone for the business, cell phone for whatever other things they may be up to. And as we've seen the deployment of these technologies, we tend to see a lot of this happening over in Asia first, and then it rolls into the West. We'll see a little bit more about that here in a bit. Now, here is kind of a selection of connected things, courtesy the latest CES, Consumer Electronics Show. Here we see an internet-connected television. This is from LG. This happens to be running ARM rather than a kind of a more traditional MIPS sort of thing, where we see MIPS that used to have a very strong hold in the set-top box business. But the interesting thing about this television is that it is running Android and not Google TV. They perceive that the market is actually people getting access to YouTube, Hulu, and Netflix rather than using the Google portal. And of course, because it is Android, they have the option of setting up their own private marketplace so that you can download Angry Birds. Now, here is a Samsung refrigerator with a 7-inch panel in it. The idea is, of course, you will hook your refrigerator into the internet. It will be able to download the latest weather, and you'll be able to use it as the replacement for the cork board on the old on the old refrigerator. Now, it also has the concept that you could potentially scan pictures. So instead of having all those kids' pictures magnetically plastered to the refrigerator, we'll simply scan them and then have a running slideshow on the refrigerator in case we really wanted to see those. Now, here's another situation. Now, here we have Kia has introduced the concept of an Android panel on the front dashboard. Talk about distracted driving. It's like, I'm not sure exactly how well this is going to go over, but it certainly is. I mean, their argument is it's heads-up display. So I guess it's all relative. We have down here in the corner, this is a wirelessly connected baby scale. Again, some of these things you wonder why, but I guess if you were a healthcare provider and you noticed that the babies from a particular region were all underweight, maybe that would be indicative of some problem in the water. I'm not sure. They did not invent internet cows. However, they did introduce this concept of being able to instrument the cattle to track their health and status. It turns out that cattle produce about 200 megabytes worth of data every year for each cow. Of course, I don't necessarily want to be the person who instruments the back end of the cow to see how things are coming out. But in any case, the concept is certainly there. And this one is kind of a scary one. You may not be able to tell from the back. It says brainwave TV. In this particular example, I mean, it's connected. You actually wear this thing and think the television channel, and it changes TV. You have to be very careful about what you're thinking, because it could change TV to a channel that might be embarrassing. But certainly, this is the kind of thing that we're starting to see. And this, of course, all of these, with the exception of the cow, was introduced at CES this year. But what we're really looking at here is the Earth as a system has been able to produce gigabytes worth of data every single day. We just haven't been able to listen to it. Well, now with the Internet of Things and the proliferation of sensors and technologies, we can start listening to the Earth. We're used to thinking about seismic, certainly out here in California, seismic sensors. But what if we started thinking about the minerals or the water in the ground? Could we have produced, could we have prevented a dust bowl situation? Had we instrumented the ground properly, could we have prevented that whole episode in American history from happening if we'd just simply been able to listen to the Earth effectively? So what are the enablers for the Internet of Things? We have tagging things. Now here we see an RFID tag, and there's been a huge push for RFID and a lot of different technologies, a lot of different components. We'll talk more about that in a bit. We have sensing things, and we have now a situation where people are actually instrumenting themselves for their own reasons. For instance, in this particular case, this thing on the guy's arm is an air quality sensor. So this individual, this particular product is targeted at someone who's asthmatic, and they want to know what the quality of the air is and have it alert them on their phone before they have an asthma attack. Okay. We have shrinking things. This is an RFID tag. It used to be this. Now it's that. And we have thinking things. Now this is, of course, the proliferation of devices like AVRs, PIC-24s and 32s, ARM Cortex M0s, M3s, and of course now moving up the scale into all the Linux devices that we're actually out here deploying. So if we think about the tagging things first, we see that the RFID piece of it, this is an RFID tag about the size of a grain of rice. This is the kind of thing that people typically implant in their animals, their pets, cats, dogs, etc., so that if they become lost, they can simply be scanned by the professional, by the veterinarian, and figure out where that cat belongs and contacted. We see it here against a human hand, and then we see, of course, its now new smaller cousin being produced. But what's an application for this kind of stuff? Well, here we see an RFID-enabled cat door, so that if the cat with the appropriate RFID tag comes up to the door, it will open, and the cat can come through, but the run-of-the-mill stray cat will not be able to get through that door. Where is the big push for RFID coming? Well, it's actually coming from retailers. If you take a look at what's happening in retailers like Walmart, they're getting ready to switch from an inventory model to a consignment model. That is, they won't actually pay the producers of the goods for the goods until the goods are sold. This is going to be a huge change in the way business is conducted throughout the world. So as we see RFID proliferation, we'll see it in milk cartons, we'll see it in our clothes, we'll see it just about everywhere. Now, this all has a good side and a not so good side. We'll talk about the security bits in a minute. And of course, sensing things, as we start instrumenting both things and people, we see that there's already a market for books on getting started with the Internet of Things. Here we see an example of a human who has augmented their sensing with ultrasonic sensors and haptic feedback devices. So the closer they get to a wall, the more the haptic feedback vibrates. They can then sense their environment. This, of course, is a potential boon for blind and other situations. However, think about what that could be used for in terms of augmented reality, in terms of augmenting our sensors, in terms of enabling humans to be able to reach out beyond our simple surroundings to detect things out in the world. And we see a couple of examples of this using a mesh technology. This happens to be built on top of Arduinos. Well, as we start shrinking things, now we start getting into some really kind of bizarre applications of the Internet of Things. We see here in this example, this is called a dust mote. And this is about 1 to 2 millimeters. It has a laser interferometer on it. It has a solar cell on it. It has mesh technology on it, mesh networking, and it has a Cortex M0 in about 2 millimeters worth of material. Now, the research that's been done on things like smart dust is that if you wanted to instrument the crowd, you simply spread these things out on the floor, and as people walk, their shoes pick them up. And then they are now instrumented, and you watch them move through large venues. Of course, one could conceive of other applications for these things, but we won't get into that. Here we have a nanobot. The nanobots have largely been focused in the medical world, where people are interested in using them to go in and cut out cancer cells and other such afflictions. Personally, I don't like the little bug-looking type nanobot. I want mine to be sharks with laser beams on their heads. But if we then take that to the next step here, a microelectromechanical system, or a MEMS, now they have nano-electromechanical systems. This particular one is rather curious. What they did was they implanted a MEM into this moth in the pupal stage. When the moth came out of its pupa, it had a sensor in it. This sensor now enables them to cause the moth to flap its wings. They can actually steer the moth. Put a camera on that and send it out as a small UAV. And of course, I wouldn't want to watch the camera output while I was flying. A little like that. But nonetheless, kind of an interesting concept for being able to instrument things in the real world and have them collect data. So what are we really getting at here? Well, we're really talking about something called the DIKW relationship. In the DIKW relationship, we have a sea of data. This sea of data is meaningless unless we can start putting some organization to it. Once we understand the relations inside of the data, we can then start to derive information from that data. But information in and of itself is of little use to us unless we can see patterns. Once we understand the patterns, we can now derive knowledge from that ultimate data source. Patterns are good, knowledge is good. But what's really important to us is then to understand the principles behind how those patterns work in the world. And those principles, then, in that understanding, we derive wisdom from that. So the whole concept behind a lot of the things that we talk about in the Internet of Things is really the concept of being able to take data, of which we have lots of it, and derive some wisdom for the understanding of how the world works as a result of that. So how can we go about improving the human condition with the Internet of Things? Well, here we have a circumstance where if we think about the number of millions of gallons of fresh water that are lost every single day by municipalities through leaking pipes. It's just the infrastructure is old. We don't know where the leaks are. In DC, we find them because a pipe bursts, and now it's ice everywhere. But what if we had the ability to instrument the pipe? What if we had the ability to be able to then recognize a potential failure in the water system before it happens? We could alert the Department of Public Works. We could tell the police, hey, redirect traffic around this intersection. We could get somebody out there to fix the leak, stop the pipe burst before it happens, and save millions of gallons of water. Especially if we could then have sensors that would travel through the water system, collecting data about where the water system was bad, and then plan our work as proactive work rather than reactive when something actually fails. Other applications, if we had a sensor on someone that could detect a potential heart attack, and that sensor could then, through their smartphone, alert the emergency personnel, dispatch the emergency personnel, alert the doctor, alert the hospital, hey, this individual's having a heart attack. It gets them into the golden hour, the time at which if you can get medical aid to someone in that first hour, chances are extremely high that you'll be able to save their lives. Of course, we have some more mundane applications of this technology as well. Let's say I have an intelligent agent that looks at my calendar and says, oh, well, he doesn't have any appointments until 10 o'clock, so I'll change the alarm clock to go off an hour later. And not only that, but I'll also start the coffee, and by looking outside, I see that the temperature is below freezing, so 5 minutes before I'm supposed to leave, it'll automatically start the Mini and start warming up the car so I don't have to go scrape the ice off of the outside of it. That would be a handy thing myself. I know when I'm out scraping ice, I really wish my car would automatically do that for me. But let's say we have our smart refrigerator with the RFID tags on everything that we put inside the refrigerator. You have to be careful not to eat an RFID tag, I would guess. Of course, then that raises the concept of smart toilet paper. Not sure about that. But in any case, what if I didn't know what I was going to have for dinner? I could ask my refrigerator, what do I have in the refrigerator that is good for dinner? It could then actually go out on the internet, look for recipes that match the things that I have in the refrigerator, and come back to me with some ideas for what I'll make when I get home. And then here we see, this one's actually deployed at this point. This is a smart pill bottle that has an LED on it, and it's actually 3G connected, and the light comes on to tell people when to take their medicine and which medicine to take. Of course, as we get older, we start having quite a collection of pills that we have to take, and based on their individual preferences, sometimes you take them in the morning, sometimes the afternoon, sometimes several times during the day. So it would be nice to have an LED that would just start blinking when it was time to take the pill. Of course, the potential for someone hacking into that and then causing mischief also exists. But when we look across kind of a broader spectrum, if we take a look at what happens with the energy production grid today, we lose over 50% of all of the energy we produce in the grid. It's just gone, radiated out, it's lost to heat, shorts, things of that sort. So if we were to take advantage of the Internet of Things and instrument microgrids, where we would have potentially some microgrids that could produce power, maybe they're wind farms or solar arrays, and we have microgrids that if there was an event in the microgrid, say a lightning strike, we could isolate that grid and be able to communicate back and forth through the grid to be able to do things like control devices. Perhaps I have my hot water heater, my oven, and my clothes dryer. Of course, we now know that a lot of the municipalities and the power production people are interested in paying you to put a device in your house that allows them to shut off certain appliances at certain times to reduce the demand on the grid. For many of us, that's not necessarily a comforting thought that someone could reach into our house and start flipping the switch on various components. But of course, we always have the option of turning it off and then, of course, not getting the payback from the power companies. But this is a huge potential for being able to isolate the grid and make it more robust. In the Baltimore-Washington area, in the case of the water system, they have only 2,500 employees servicing over 1 million people in the greater Baltimore area. And their issue is that most of those folks are being serviced by Windows 95 machines. And that's because they can't update them. There's nobody left that understands how they work. So we have to make some investments in the infrastructure. This is inevitable worldwide. So as we make investments in the infrastructure, why not instrument them with the Internet of Things so that we can better control all of the devices that we have to in order to be able to deliver services to humans? Well, what this means, though, is that we're going to have connections everywhere. And in this particular example, we have the late Senator Stevens' tubes. It's not the internet, it's a collection of tubes. And all of these devices are interconnected. This one happens to be using 802.15.4, so it's a Zigbee connection. But we have the hot water heater, we have plants, we have my Mini sitting out here. All of these things allow us to then reach in from the outside and affect some level of control. We've seen the commercials where the mother is talking to the son is sitting at the table doing his homework dutifully, and the mother says, "Why are you sitting in the dark?" And she hits on her smartphone the button that turns the lights on in the house. How did she do that? Is that a good thing? Those are all interesting questions that when we start adding intelligence to previously unconnected devices, now we have to understand what that means to us in terms of the semantic web. Perhaps these devices then start exchanging information in their own private little Facebook that let them know how the plant here needs water, and alert me on my smartphone that I forgot to water the plants. Maybe. There are a lot of opportunities here for us to be able to reach in and add connectivity to devices that previously had no connectivity whatsoever. So the key thing here, though, is addressability. How do we make this happen? We have personal area networks like 802.15.4, Zigbee, Zigbee Pro. There are a lot of mesh networking technologies that are out there. I like mesh networking because it then gives us the opportunity for multiple paths. There is no one single path of failure. If the Ethernet cable gets cut, you suddenly have no connectivity. That's not the case with a mesh network. But how do we then individually address every single device? If I have a sensor on every plant in my house, that's going to be potentially tens of sensors. I would prefer fewer plants in my house, but my wife seems to like them. So as a consequence, the network inside of my house starts to grow considerably with all the devices, the cats, the dogs, the plants, the cars, the coffee machine, etc. So one of the ways for us to do this is to actually kind of step up. Here's a picture of the regional internet registries, and move over to IPv6. Now, IPv6, of course, is difficult to quantify for a lot of people. So let me see if I can give you a concept here for exactly how big the IPv6 address space is. If IPv4 could be represented as a volume, it would be an iPod. That's about the size of the IPv4 address space. If we were then to represent the IPv6 address space as a volume, it would be something the size of the Earth. It is the concept of every grain of sand on every beach having 9 separate network addresses. That's what we're talking about here. That number of addresses. That's big. How do we handle that on processors like 8-bit AVRs, on 16-bit PIC24s? Moving up, of course, in our situation, maybe we don't. This is our opportunity as Linux developers to be able to say, look, the mesh networks, the little bitty sensors, the temperature sensor and the water sensor and all these things inside of the house are really not connected to IPv6. They are connected via a mesh network to a Linux concentrator, to a Linux-based device that's then going to be able to coordinate all of that information, perhaps pass some of it off to the grid to let them know maybe we have solar arrays on our house and we want to pass that information back to the grid so that we get credit for having produced power. Or perhaps we want to take the next step down, and that is to employ 6LoWPAN. 6LoWPAN is IPv6 on 802.15.4 low-rate wireless networks. All of this is a lot of opportunity because, quite frankly, most of us haven't done anything with IPv6 yet, and very few of us have done much with the 802.15.4 type networks, the mesh networks. So addressability of all of this data is going to be key. Remember, in the chart that had data going up through that line, it was data versus connectedness. The more connected we can make this data, the more likely we are to be able to see patterns in the data. So with all of these potentially billions of devices out there, how are we going to power all of this? If we were to take a look at 50 billion devices, if each one of them used 1 watt, you're talking about having to more than quadruple the number of power production plants that exist in the world. That's not likely to happen. So how can we power all of these sensors? Well, it turns out there's been quite a few breakthroughs in technology that allow us to do energy harvesting. Here we see an example. This is a piezoelectric energy harvester. It happens to have a battery on it. So as this device flexes, it generates electricity. And that electricity gets stored in a battery. So this is an energy harvesting power supply in something less than the size of a penny. New products are coming out. Here we have a set of running shoes that inside of the heel is one of these piezoelectric energy harvesters. So as the human runs, it actually charges the batteries that then tell the GPS locator in the shoe where you've run, and that gets uploaded to your blog so that you can tell all of your running friends, oh yes, I ran around Central Park today. Well, how much power does a human body actually produce? Well, we all know from watching The Matrix that the human body is actually a wonderful battery. And before I start calling you all copper top, let's think about exactly how much power does a human body produce. Well, from our research in space, on the International Space Station, etc., we found that humans radiate power like a 100-watt light bulb. All the time. If we're just kind of sitting here doing nothing, each one of you is producing about 100 watts of outputted energy. Now, that jumps up to closer to 800 watts if you're under strenuous activity, so if you're running or something like that. So there's a lot of power there. How can we take that power and use it for these sensors? Well, here is one case where we're actually taking the power that we're putting into running and using it to charge a battery. We have the potential for instrumenting the streets, making sidewalks and roads capable of generating electricity simply by virtue of the fact that you rode your car over the top of them. And if we take that to its next logical conclusion, this is a piezoelectric power supply, so is that. That happens to have a Cortex M0 on it, and memory, and flash. All of that in that little bitty piece. So when we think about powering the Internet of Things, we can think in terms of attaching a generator to the top of a revolving door. We can think in terms of just simply being able to capture all of the energy that we as humans expend every single day as a way of being able to maintain the quality of life for our sensors. And it really starts to become that, where when you talk about the semantic web, we're talking about having machines talking to machines. The machine-to-machine communication starts to dominate. Last year, the predominant communications traffic in North America, 29% of all internet traffic, Netflix. In the not-too-distant future, it will be dominated by machine-to-machine communications, where as business tries to derive value from this, we are instrumenting the earth, we are bringing in education, we're trying to teach our kids about the power they use, the power they create, we're trying to inform them about how the earth works and how they can preserve some piece of the earth that we may have ruined in the past. Perhaps they can make it better. We see that health is a huge place where the Internet of Things is coming into play. If you talk to design med folks, they are really interested in how do I instrument the human body. I have fewer and fewer health workers available at a given hospital. How do I then take those fewer health workers and allow them to continue to deliver a high quality of service to those patients? The way we do that is we instrument the patients so that the health worker can service more patients using less effort. We, of course, have things in the home. We've already talked a little bit about my intelligent agent that looks at my calendar and figures out when I need to wake up. Personally, I like the idea of being able to have somebody change the alarm clock to guarantee that I can get an extra hour or two of sleep. Of course, transportation. Wouldn't it be wonderful, and we've seen this, those of us from Europe have had an opportunity to see applications for their smartphones that tell them when the bus is coming, that tell them when the train is going to arrive, because they're getting live information from the trains and the buses and the taxis to let them know where those individual pieces of transportation equipment are and when they will arrive. And of course, the energy, the smart energy community, this is going to be big business for smart energy. So all of these things are connected. But because they're all connected, we also need to take an extra step. And that is, we need to make sure that we can secure it in some way. Security is that 800-pound gorilla in the room that we all know it's there, and many of us are a little concerned about talking about. So privacy and security will be a key piece. If you have a semantic web where machine-to-machine communications is collecting data about you and your behaviors and can share that with other machines, where do we want that data to end up? How do we want that data controlled? Who owns that data? Is it you, the machine that collected it, the internet? Who owns the data? So as we start collecting things together, we have concerns for security. We obviously have issues with privacy. What are we creating here? Are we creating Skynet? Or are we creating the opportunity for a nefarious government or group of individuals to be able to control us? And if a lot of the information that we're going to be creating is machine to machine, what if we have an organization that can somehow shape the information that's being presented to those machines? Can that then turn around and shape our perception of the world, of the politics, of the government? We all know that you can believe everything you read in Wikipedia. if we could somehow have a machine-to-machine Wikipedia that someone could shape the data, could you still believe it? Would you believe it? It's remarkable. I'm a mentor on a robotics team, a first robotics team at high school, and I actually saw one of my students the other day looking up on Google, what should I do with my life? Really? You're going to ask Google what you should do with your life? As we have this connectedness increase, we have to remember that we are ultimately the shapers of our perception. The data that's being presented, the knowledge that's being collected and presented to us by the web is not us. The data, we can't allow this deluge of information to infuse us and take over our ability to think about what's going on in the world. As Nietzsche says here, all things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. So as we increase the connectedness of the Internet of Things, we need to keep that in perspective. We need to understand that we ultimately make the decision for what we do with all the data we're collecting. But there are a lot of experiments that are currently underway. We see here New Songdo City, located on the Incheon Peninsula in Korea, expected to be finished somewhere in the 2015 timeframe. This is a completely connected city. It's part of Korea's U-City program, the Ubiquitous City. In the Ubiquitous City, you do not need identification any longer. You have a security chip. This security chip, if you come to a door and you're permitted to go in, the door will unlock. You don't need money. You'll be able to walk up with your security chip. You'll be able to buy whatever you want to buy. It will be able to look at the past history. Let's say you like to go to action-adventure flicks on Friday evening. If there's a new action-adventure flick coming out, it will be able to tell you that there's a new flick coming out. There's a lot of things that are happening here. They have energy harvesting in the sidewalks, energy harvesting in the doors, solar arrays on the building tops. This is a city that people are lining up to try and get into. There's over 340 million square feet of office space in this facility. And it's built as a multi-use office, residential, business, commerce. So it is the concept of the arcology from the old SimCity game in one place. We have the Eye project in Japan, the Eye Technology project. In that, vehicles are being instrumented to allow them to communicate back to central clearing facilities to let you individually know, oh, there's no reason for you to leave right now because the traffic's all jammed up. Of course, the potential is your employer could just simply tell you that. Oh, no, you don't need to go home right now. Traffic's bad. Trust me, I've seen it. Here in the United States, of course, we do have the Intelligent Vehicle Highway System. There are lots of experiments that are going on right now where taxi cabs are being instrumented to report back traffic flows. The street corners themselves are being instrumented to report how many vehicles are traversing through a particular intersection. So that's happening here in the United States. Here's an example of something happening over in Europe. This is a sensor attached to this poor individual's head. Perhaps it's an alien device, I'm not sure. But now what it does is it senses his demeanor. And as he starts getting more and more frustrated in traffic, there's a little laptop, you can't really see it too well in here, but there is a little screen that would pop up and say, free coffee at Starbucks for you if you pull off at the next exit. Trying to get them out of traffic before they become the next rage example and help them manage their frustration in traffic. But here we see kind of the ultimate realization from the business perspective of the Internet of Things. If I can collect enough information about you as an individual and can correlate it to you, then I can target you for specific advertisements. I can take that information that now I know you go to Action Adventure Flicks on Friday evening, and as you walk by a display in a store, have an advertisement specifically pop up that knows that you're a 30-something individual and I want to show you a sports car to attract your attention rather than a minivan to attract your attention. And even to the point where these types of ads on the sides of buses, maybe they're not paper anymore, maybe they're electronic. Maybe it says, well, they normally get a Starbucks about this time. So as I'm walking down through the street, it flashes up a thing that says, hey, there's a Starbucks right behind you. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I should perhaps go get a Starbucks. So being able to target you as advertising is one of the ways that we'll actually pay for the Internet of Things. People will then, corporations will pay for you to instrument. And as individuals, we're actually paying the corporations for the privilege of instrumenting our own bodies. Think about all of the devices that we're now putting in our shoes, our cell phones, and all the things that we carry around with us that actually help track us. So what we have here is both chaos and opportunity. We have chaos in that this is a virgin field here, greenfield technologies, an opportunity for us to be able to step out and shape the future of the world by understanding what the technology does and how it can be successfully applied. It is an opportunity for us to survive, to grow the Linux infrastructure, and present our concepts for the future of the world out as the world tries to get a grasp on this technology. But as is most often the case, the technology far outstrips the ability of lawmakers and individuals to understand the ethical implications of what this technology means. So I would charge each and every one of you, as you move forward and consider what's happening in the Internet of Things, think about your role in it. Think about how you will decide to use the data and instrument the world, and then what you can do with that to make the human condition better. Thank you very much. Questions? Anybody? Heard enough? I got it. Question. I can't really see very well.
So you mentioned that it should be all right. You mentioned the human body generates 100 watts. Mm-hmm. Is that useful energy or heat energy?
Depending on how you're harvesting it, yes. It can be. It's heat energy. It can, in fact, be harvested into useful energy with the appropriate energy harvesting devices. What fraction? If we can even only get 10%, 10 watts, that's a lot. We can power a lot of stuff at 10 watts. We can even power Intel atoms at 10 watts. No, I'm just kidding. Oh! Yes, there are issues of thermodynamics, obviously, but as the technology gets better, we're going to be better able to harvest the energy. I'm really more interested, not so much in the heat energy that we produce, but the kinetic energy that we produce by simply moving around. Anything else? Yeah. Oh, hey, Kareem.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could let us know what are the warning signs of this stuff becoming self-aware.
When the machine says, I don't think you should do that, then we've probably gone too far.
It'll start with your bathroom scale.
That's right. Anything else? Could you explain your glyph? Oh, the glyph. For those of you who don't speak Chinese, I'm sorry, this is chaos. This is, in fact, a plant coming up through the ground. So it is the symbol for both chaos and opportunity. And it's basically, the modern translation is, chaos is the place where dreams begin. Yes?
So how do we convince specifically like infrastructure managers of the business value of this Internet of Things? Because I've gotten a lot of pushback of like the most basic sensor system, because a lot of our infrastructure just needs critical repairs and they just don't even want to consider any of this. Although we see the long-term value, how do we convince them that it's worth it?
Well, one of the first places that, of course, the Internet of Things will manifest itself is in advertising, unfortunately. Or depending on what industry you're in, maybe that's a good thing, because advertising allows them to generate some revenue from it. But if, for instance, we had the bridge collapse in Minneapolis a few years ago, had we had a couple of simple stress sensors on that, we could have potentially predicted that and understood exactly when that bridge was going to fail, or even if it was in danger of failing. So part of this is an argument for infrastructure managers to say, look, if you allow me to instrument, then we can change the way we do maintenance. If we change the way we do maintenance, we can perhaps save money by knowing that a bridge is going to collapse and do just-in-time repair, rather than going through and saying, well, it's been 10 years, it's time to strip all the paint off of these things and replace it. So there are opportunities there for being able to predict failure. How much does it cost for Department of Public Works to go dig up the street while there is a failure in the water main? And the amount of damage that's done by that water to the individuals that happen to live in that area. If we had the ability to predict that and stop it from happening, we could have saved hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. It is a difficult sell, I'll give you that, because there are people who do have the vision and understand that being able to instrument the world gives us the ability to predict when things will happen. But no question, if you simply instrument the water mains, the argument might be, well, I can save you millions of gallons of water that's leaking right now. That might be enough. Other places might be a more difficult sell. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, thanks
Thank you
very
very much.